Hey guys, how's it going? As promised, we're going to start on the last half of this, the last part of the semester, working with the principles of design. Now, today's lecture is going to be a little bit generic, but then we're going to get more into unity and variety. But before we do that, I have to kind of remind you of what the elements and the principles of design actually are. The principles of design are how an artist uses the elements of design, okay? And I've talked about that before, and I hope that everybody remembers. I'm going to be going over some of this information a little bit here. So what are the elements of design? Well, we have line. You remember line? Line can imply movement. It can be static. Horizontal line is like the horizon, which is kind of relaxing. There's no movement there, but a diagonal line has movement, and of course, a vertical has implied movement. We have different types of line, as in crosshatch, contour, cross contour. There's all sorts of different types of lines, and I hope that you do remember most of what those were. The next is color. Color is a very complicated subject, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to get into the additive color more, because if you remember, we talked about subtractive color, and subtractive color is what we see in the real world. It's what I'm looking at right now, probably almost what well, technically you're probably not looking at it right now because you're looking at a screen, but if you were to look around your room or wherever you're at, that's subtractive color. It's absorption and reflection. Color, we did a color wheel, and we have the primaries, right? Red, blue, and yellow. And then we have complementaries. The opposite on the color wheel are the complementaries. We also have analogous colors. We have tertiary, secondary. We have split complementary. There's all sorts of different color systems that we can work with, and not systems, but more of different ways that we can arrange different colors. Shape. Shape, if you remember, is just the form. And we can have multiple shapes that create one shape. And it's one of the elements that people need to be aware of. And then texture. We have implied texture, invented texture, we have actual texture. There's a lot of ways that we could look at this. If we look at a cat, it has real texture, right? We pet it, it's furry, it's soft. But if we paint that same cat, we have a simulated texture, right? And then say we change from painting fur, we change to making it chrome. That's an invented texture. Maybe not invented, but it's an abstract texture. And then we have space. We have positive, negative, white, and dark space. We also have perspective. We have atmospheric perspective, when something is appears to be further away because maybe there's a haze in it, that the haze of the clouds or whatever's creating that haze, it pushes the elements back. We kind of lose clarity of the image. When you're up close to something, it's clear. As you look, as it moves further away, it kind of disappears. It loses its vitality. It's not as bright. It's not as colorful. And along with space, we have 1-point perspective, like a railroad track going down. We have 2-point perspective, like I don't know if you remember, we did kind of like a brick, and we have 2 points that we draw lines to, and then we divide it up so that we have kind of a shape. And 3-point perspective as well. And we worked with that in Illustrator. Principles of design is how we describe how we use the elements of design. Now, I like this definition. This kind of clarifies for me at least, and I hope that you get something out of it as well. So I'm just going to read it and then talk a little bit about it. There are no absolute rules for good design. However, there are principles and general guidelines for effective visual communication. We study them for the same reason artists do, to develop our innate design sense, to give ourselves a vocabulary for talking to one another about what we see, and to become more sensitive to the expressive and relational possibilities. That kind of brings it all together, because a lot of times if we're just using vocabulary, it really isn't that important, is it? We could just describe things in using different words. Instead of contrast, we could say bright and light, or dark and light. But if we're trying to develop a vocabulary to talk to other people, to other designers, to people that have that same understanding of that word, we need to use the word contrast or variety or whatever it is. I think that this is a really good definition of why the principles of design and the elements of design are very important, and why we study them. Okay, so the principles of design. We're finally here. We're finally talking about the principles of design. Well, as you can see, there are 5 of them. And before I get into talking about each one of these individually, what I want to make sure is everybody realizes that there's a basic consensus of what the principles of design are. But not everybody agrees. There are some people that will change the names. For example, when I was researching for this lecture, unity is what I was taught, is what I kind of learned, and that's what I wanted to call it. But a few places that I was researching, we're calling it harmony. So that's an example of that. You may run into something, or you may be talking to somebody and you say, the unity of the piece is strong. Well, they may be thinking harmony, which is fine, but there's always a possibility that the words may be similar but different, if that makes sense. Okay, so unity, harmony, and variety. So these two are the same, and then the opposite is variety. We have balance, contrast, repetition and rhythm, and scale and proportion. Now each one of these is going to be a lecture. Today's lecture is unity and variety. For the remainder of the lecture, I'm going to be calling it unity, unless I slip and call it harmony, but I'm not planning on it. Okay, so unity. Unity and variety are complementary concerns. What does that mean? Well, technically, what it means is that they are together. If you have a lot of harmony, you have very little variety. If you have a very little unity / harmony, then you have a lot of variety. One is the opposite of the other. If you think of it as like a slide rule, like say we do 50% right in the middle, and here's the ends. If you have anything that we slide that, say we have 60% unity, that means that 40% is variety. If we have 60% variety, then only 40% of unity. They're part of the same thing. They just work the opposite. So unity. Unity is the appearance or condition of oneness. It's that things belong together. In design, unity describes the feeling that all the elements in a work belong together. And that's important because for some things it's easy to decide, but there are things that are a little bit more difficult, and you need every little help that you can get to understand if unity or variety is working in the piece. The elements in a work make up a coherent and harmonious whole. This is, you'll notice that harmonious, and some people call it harmony. The unity, instead of unity, they call it harmony. The elements in a work make up a coherent and harmonious whole. Pretty much the same as before, that everything works together. Everything relates to each other. When a work of art has unity, we feel that any change would diminish its quality. And that's subjective. Yeah, any change could probably enhance it, but it might diminish the unity. Does that make sense? That the unity doesn't necessarily, a lot of unity doesn't necessarily mean it's good. It just, that if you add some variety to it, you may diminish the quality of the unity. Repetition can create unity. It's comforting if, the fence posts as you're driving down the highway and you see the fence posts go by. One of those fence posts is missing and it's like, it doesn't seem right. It's like, what happened? More to that, and then patterns. The checkerboard pattern. And imagine, the floor. You have black and white tiles and they're staggered in such a way that it looks like a checkerboard. It creates a sense of unity as well. So, as I said, the opposite of unity is variety. And the basic understanding of variety is that it provides diversity. It's the chaos. It's the opposite of harmony. All right, so variety. Variety counteracts unity. I already stated that. The sameness of too much unity is boring. And it's kind of what I was saying, if you're going down the road and you see fence posts, and it keeps going and going and going and going, eventually you're going to stop looking because it just keeps going. It's boring, right? But what happens if one of the fence posts is black and one of them is green and one of them's red and one of them's white? There's some variety there, right? And that makes it a little bit more interesting. On the other hand, too much variety can be considered chaotic. Finding a balance between variety and unity is important for good design and art. And that's the key. I tend to go towards variety. I kind of like a little bit of confusion in what I create. But there needs to be a balance. You need to decide how much confusion that you're going to create, how much chaos you're going to create, and how comfortable you're going to make the viewer of your work or the viewer of whatever you're creating. So I've got some examples. When we look at something, we look at it and try to find connections. And I'm going to talk a little bit more when we get down to about this next, in 2 bullet points. In this image right here, we're looking for a connection here. And there are several that you should notice. First is, there's squares, right? That's one. All of them are squares. There are no circles, there's nothing there but just squares. And they're all black squares, right? There's no green, there's no red, there's no other color. So the colors are unified. The squares, the shapes are unified. And then we have lines, right? And the lines are all the same distance apart. They're all white, and everything is kind of going together. So we have 3 things going on here. This example is an example of unity in shape, color, space, and you could also say line. It's a good example of unity, but it's a bad example of something interesting. How long would you spend looking at this? Probably not very long. Maybe 4 seconds, 5 seconds maybe. Once you see it, it's stored in your memory. You don't need to look at it again. There's nothing changing. There's nothing hiding in the imagery. There's nothing that's going to keep you interested for longer than 3 or 4 seconds. This is unity in the extreme. So now I added a little bit of variety. Not very much, but enough to start to make it a little bit more interesting. In this example, we have the same shapes in space, but variety is starting to emerge. When we look at it, there's a difference. We still have the same shapes. We still have the same lines. We still have the same composition. Everything is the same. The only thing different is technically the color. I should say the color, but technically it's not color. It's the value that's changing of those black squares. Depending on the viewer, somebody might even say that it appears to be fading away, receding into the distance, kind of like an atmospheric perspective. If that's the case, then there is some space variety here. That this is closer and this is further away, so we have this perspective that's going on. Again, we have too much unity, and most people would probably say that this is boring. Some people might be intrigued by it, but most people are going to go, I saw it, don't need to spend any more time on it, so I'm good, let's move on. Okay? So let's move on. All right, now we're moving forward. We're starting to add specifically variety. Here's an example of unity with variety. I made a point of making a hard change. The reason I did that is because of something called Gestalt. Now, I don't know if you remember, but the other day I said that there were some lectures that I want to complete before the end of the semester, but I can't fit them in. But one of those that I'm going to try to fit in is on Gestalt. What Gestalt is it's the understanding of how humans look at things. All of us, 99% of us, 95% of us, all do the same thing when we look at an object. And that is, we try to understand it. We look at it, we look for shapes that we can recognize. If we can't figure out the shapes, we look for other things to kind of make use of what we see. For example, if you were to look at this right here, you see that same kind of pattern that we had before. And because you've seen it before, it's kind of dismissed, right? I mean, you see it, but then you see these 4 circles. And why are those circles there? As humans, we want to problem solve. We want to understand. Is it a square? Is this supposed to be a square? Are they people? Or what is this trying to represent with those 4 circles? Now that's Gestalt, and there's a lot more to it. I mean, seriously, it's more than one lecture, but I would fit it into one lecture. If there's time, I definitely will do it, or I may do it and just put it up and hope that you guys watch it and not assign it. This is an example of variety of shape. We have squares everywhere except for 4 circles. Because of variety, there's something for us to focus on. It all of a sudden makes it a little bit more interesting. Before we had kind of a sense of fading, but it really wasn't strong. It wasn't enough to make it interesting. Here, we focus on that. Most of us will spend all of our time trying to understand what it is that we're looking at. Because variety is starting to be more pronounced in this example, the composition begins to be more interesting. That's debatable, that's subjective, but I think most of us would agree that this is more interesting than the other ones we looked at. Now we're playing with variety. Now we're pushing it in. All right? In this example, we have the same shapes, but variety is starting to emerge as a strong part of the piece. We could say that this piece is about something, right? Again, Gestalt. Our eyes look at this, and we're trying to understand what's happening here. If it wasn't for variety, this would be boring. This would just be those shapes. Variety is pushed into this composition to a point that all of us, I think, would agree that it's much more interesting. This example has variety of space and even color. Now some of the elements I see here are shape, I see line. Okay, now when we look at art, now remember all art has the elements of design, and the way we describe the elements of design is through the principles of design. So the principles of design need to be discussed when we look at artwork, okay? When you look at a composition, you look for similar elements. This is that Gestalt again. If you're looking at this piece, you'll notice that there's kind of like bowl shapes, like saucers. In this work, the visual units are saucer shapes. Like I said, they're like bowls. And they all, I mean, pretty much that's what it is. The repetition of this shape creates harmony and unity. And it's something that we, as humans, kind of focus on. All right, so these are bowls, or these are saucers, or whatever you consider them to be. It makes sense, right? They're all roughly the same shape. There's nothing that stands out as being unusual. There isn't a dog in the background or anything like that. It's all just this repetition of this shape that happens to look like a bowl. The variety develops out of the differences in the shapes, size, and color. So we have some that are big, some that are small, some are white, and so that makes this interesting. Now, again, it's dependent on its subjective opinion, whether you like this, you think this is interesting or not, but it's much more interesting than, say, those squares that I showed you on the last slide. So when we look for unity in things, there's different ways that we can go about it. The balance between harmony and variety can be tipped towards either principle depending on the artist's intentions. For example, that's basically just saying that you can do whatever you want. If you want it to be more chaotic, you would have more variety. If you wanted it to be more relaxing and people to like it, you're probably going to not take a chance with variety, and maybe you'll stick to unity. In this example, the artist moves towards variety. If we look, he varies the shape, size, direction, and color with a strong sense of vigor. He's making a point of variety. In a lot of ways, this can create curiosity in the viewer, and it provides a sense of vitality. If I create chaos, remember what I said about Gestalt. You're looking, you're trying to make sense of what you're looking at. Now, it may be uncomfortable, and depending on what it is that's chaotic, if it's violent or something like that, you may not enjoy it, and it may be a bad choice. But in a situation from Jonas's work here, he's varying the shapes, the colors. He's basically pushing that variety very hard. He's making a point of not creating unity with those pieces. I hope that made sense. I'm going to end the lecture here. That'll make it roughly, I think, about 30 minutes. So yeah, for now, I think that's good. See you guys.